The most interesting questions to me, and ones that you talk about in this podcast, have to do with the self and free will, consciousness and agency.
You're listening to Good is in the Details. I'm Gwendolyn Dolske.
And I'm Rudy Salo.
And this is the podcast where we learn what we didn't know in the spirit of Socrates, all with the aim of a more knowledgeable life, a happy life. And for this episode, I have to tell you, I have read one of the best nonfiction books in a long time, 100%. This book of our guest has storytelling, medicine, history, pop culture references like the film Memento, Star Trek, Grey's Anatomy, and historical case studies like JFK, Malala Yousafzai, Michael J. Fox, Muhammad Ali. And this book also addresses major philosophical questions about the mind and free will. The book is Gray Matters, a Biography of Brain Surgery by Dr. Ted Schwartz. Oh my goodness. I mean, I know, I always say this, I love the book, but I am telling you, from the second I picked this up, I ignored everything and just kept on reading. It put me in an excellent mood because it was so interesting and I love great ideas. We are so lucky and so honored to have Dr. Schwartz. We get to have conversations about his history in brain surgery. What's the disposition of the brain surgeon? What is the tension between science and culture? Our assumptions about what makes a person a person. Is it possible to swap brains with somebody? Is the mind an illusion? Do you have free will? What say you, Rudy?
Yeah, in spirit of keeping this short, because the real star of this is our Dr. Ted, who came on, graciously gave us as much time as he did, graciously gave us wonderful copies of this book, which I have already suggested to a number of people. He took a couple of my, I'd like to call them scary questions, scary health questions, and he answered them in a wonderful way. Was not a boring guest. No offense to brain surgeons. I actually know a decent amount of them. They're all very fascinating people. Yeah, no, it was a really fun discussion. And I liked he flirted with some really serious questions. It's pretty clear to me that this doctor does not believe in the notion of free will. We didn't get too deep into that. I really feel like that might be an episode where we ask him to come back on. But that is addressed a lot in his book. I think this is a fascinating discussion that people will really enjoy. Like, what's it really like to be a brain surgeon? I think it's pretty fascinating and interesting.
And remember, listeners, if you're enjoying the show, please share this episode. I know that I loved this book. I also think you need to get the book. Give it to a friend. Any of your friends in the medical field, nurses, doctors, is going to love this. And if you haven't already, go over to patreon.com/goodisinthedetails. The link is in the show notes, and become part of our community and our book club and support the pod. Okay, let's talk about the brain with Dr. Schwartz. Ted, your goal is to get other people to
read the book, to sort of take a dive into these ideas. I think some people look at the book and it's intimidating, right? It's like a 500-page book about brain surgery, but it's about so much more than that.
It's easy to rave about it. I mean, I even texted Rudy when I started your book. I said, he is a damn good writer. I mean, even... Okay, just your prose. Like one of the analogies that you put at the very beginning. Okay, this is going to take me a second. It was in the prologue when you were about to do a surgery. Oh, yes. And the technique. So this is right in the prologue. But the operation I'm performing today has about as much in common with Freeman's lobotomies as an F-16 has with Wilbur and Orville Wright's first flying machine. So your book is not only informative, but it's an absolute delight to read. As far as medical history in books, I've read, I don't know if this would count, but 5 Days at Memorial, which was about Memorial Hospital that had the most amount of deaths after Hurricane Katrina. And there was an investigation as to what was going on. And it turns out that a couple of physicians and a nurse euthanized some patients.
No way. Wow.
Yeah. So it was a big thing in medical ethics. Atul Gawande's book on an imperfect science. But at any rate, I guess my point is this is top tier. And Rudy will appreciate this. You have so many pop cultural movie references. Oh, there's another book, A Telltale Brain. And the very first is by the neurosurgeon. The very first opening quote is from Sherlock. Yes, is from Sherlock Holmes. And I love it. And I see it threaded in your book because it really really just goes to show how the humanities or a joy of literature and storytelling doesn't interfere with scientific method, but actually enhances one's creativity, one's humanity when it comes to work. With that, I'll say, Rudy, you and Ted both are Star Trek fans.
Oh, wow. Another nerd. I love it.
Yeah, no,
Rudy.
this is the Nerds podcast, Ted. I constantly drop references, primarily the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. So feel free to do so yourself on this program.
Yeah, I
Our
think I'll
audience will love it.
follow. I think I'll follow those because I drop those throughout my book a lot. And you never know who's going to get lost and who's going to get those references. So you have to be careful. Gwen, I love the comment you made about that line that you referred to in the prologue. Believe it or not, the editor wanted me to cut that paragraph out. And when you work with an editor, they want to cut out so much stuff because they want to make it shorter. And like I stuck to my guns on that paragraph because they thought it takes the reader out of the experience of the surgery because I'm sort of talking about the surgery in a meta way. And I really wanted to keep that paragraph in. And I'm so glad you said that you liked that paragraph because it just means that I did the right thing, sticking to my guns and not editing it out.
Okay, so that's why I really like your book. It's just very accessible. So when you have analogies like that, it works. And even toward the end, I mean, I loved the film Memento. I had no idea that that was based on an actual case.
Yeah.
And so if you had, let's just say from a writing point of view, if you had just described what was going on with memory being in different parts of the brain and the trauma and what is going on with the patient Henry, it would not have resonated with me the same unless I had seen the film Memento.
Yeah.
And so your bringing that up was just fascinating. And this idea of being stuck in time.
Yeah, one of the challenges of a book like this is to bring the lay reader in, right? And to make them realize all the ways in which neurosurgery has touched our culture. That's why I sort of did those celebrity stories and politicians and sports figures who had brain surgery. So people would be like, yeah, I remember that. And now here's an expert explaining what happened, why it happened, why is that important?
I'm just going to say up front, I'm probably going to ask some hopelessly naive questions. I might even edit it out if I think I sound too dumb, but I want to know if you recall the first time you saw a brain. You've been studying, you want to go into medicine. I even see that you read philosophy, which is obvious in your book too, so yay. But the trajectory of studying and medical school, do you recall the first time you saw a human brain? And can you delve into your memory? Is that still intact? Which part of your brain?
I recall it like it was yesterday. It's a great question because I will never forget the first time I saw the human brain. I was a medical student and I was very young in medical school and kind of rotating through different surgical specialties. And I walked into this operating room and I saw this neurosurgeon who was sitting in a chair like they were in a cockpit. And Rudy, this gets back to the Star Trek references. And I make another metaphor. Imagine you've studied the topography of the moon for 10 years and you've learned all the physics and you've learned all the flight simulations, whatever an astronaut has to go through in the astronaut training. And you've imagined what it's going to be like to be on the moon. And then imagine when the door opens and you're there and you actually take your first step and you look around and you actually see it with your own eyes. That's the experience of seeing the brain for the first time. You're seeing this thing that you've studied for years and you've read about and you understand contains every human emotion, everything we've ever felt, every memory we have, the history of all of humanity that sort of led up to the development of this incredible organ. The neurosurgeons who operate on the brain, they sit in a chair that wraps its arms around you because they need to rest their elbows on these chairs to reduce their tremor. They're looking through microscopes. It almost looks like, the alien cockpit from Aliens that those people are in, where they're sort of encased as they're navigating through space. For neurosurgery, as opposed to going into outer space, you're traveling into an inner space, which is this tiny little microcosm, because they're doing all their work in this area that's roughly the size of a postage stamp. And they travel into this place that most people don't get to go to. And they work at a scale that most people don't appreciate, which is on the scale of really millimeters. That's the land that we live in. And they get to see this incredible anatomy and this incredible topography that you can study in books, but to see it with your own eyes is really sort of this marvelous experience, this aha moment where you see it for the first time. And the minute I saw saw it, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe that a human being gets to do this. And that if this is what I choose to do with my life, I could spend the rest of my life living in this place and working in the human brain. What a thrill and what an honor and an opportunity that is for me. So I'll never forget the first time I saw the human brain. It was just an incredible moment.
How old were you?
You finish college, I'm probably a third year medical student. So I'm probably 25 at this stage.
Dr. Ted, can I take you back a little bit earlier? When you were a child, did
Star
you... No, I'm not going to go into Star Trek. Were you a kid who was not afraid of the sight of blood? Were you a kid who didn't fear going to the doctor or getting stabbed with needles? Were you a kid who, when a kid broke his arm, you'd go over and like see the protruding bone? Because I tell you, I'm a kid who, when I was a little kid, all of that stuff scared me and grossed me out. So I just want to go back to even your earlier life. Did this stuff interest you when you were a little kid?
I don't remember feeling particularly grossed out or particularly attracted to it. I was more curious about the science behind it. I mean, I was as scared of needles as any kid is, but I wasn't like completely paralyzed by it. I wasn't paralyzed by fear, but I did not like going to doctors, right? No one as a kid, I think, likes to go to the doctor because every time you go, there's another vaccination that you have to get, at least back in the day when they were giving vaccinations. I was kind of ambivalent, and it really took a while to see it more from the perspective of the curiosity of the science behind it and why are they doing what they're doing to get me interested in it.
The reality is, and this is a big part of your book and probably a big part of our audience, and you address this a lot in your book, is, hey, what's it really like to be a brain surgeon? I mean, you probably get that all the time, right? You are on and you mentioned this in your book, let's just be honest, you're on the pecking order of intelligence. You had a couple quotes in there as, oh, you wrote your first novel? Well, you're not a brain surgeon. Oh, you swam the English Channel? Oh, you're not a brain surgeon. So we'll get that out of the way. You're a brain surgeon. Did you always know you were going to be a brain surgeon?
The answer is no, for sure. And I want to talk about the comment you made beforehand for a second. But to first answer your question, I was really interested in astronomy and astrophysics growing up, which is the Star Trek part of me. I imagined studying astronomy and astrophysics. That was my declared major when I went to college. I was really interested in the universe and how the universe was created and the physics behind it all. But I realized I really did not have that mathematical mind that you need to be at the pecking order of that field. And with regards to your question, part of what my book does is to sort of deconstruct the myth of the brain surgeon as being smarter than everyone else. I don't think that what makes a great brain surgeon is smarts. It's not that I'm trying to be overly humble about it. That's just the reality of it. I mean, it is a discipline that requires enormous sacrifice and focus, hard work and compassion. I mean, there's an enormous skill set that is required to become a great neurosurgeon, but it's not like we're solving quadratic equations. A lot of what we're doing in the operating room is plumbing. I mean, it's very fine plumbing, and you have to really understand the anatomy, but it's information that anyone can learn if they're willing to put in the amount of time it takes to learn it. And if they're willing to sacrifice their lives for that many years to acquire the skill, I don't think it's such an enormous barrier to entry in intelligence per se. It's more about dedication, sacrifice, and grit that are the qualities you need to be a great neurosurgeon.
I'm sure a lot of parents are going to now repeat what you just said to their children, say, no, you can be a brain surgeon.
For sure.
Little dummy, you can do it. You just got to work your ass off. I want to tie a couple of things together. I think that doing brain surgery is like being an astrophysicist because it's so still relatively new and we still don't understand everything like the brain. It is much more like exploring the universe than anything else. And so the fact that you're a Star Trek fan and you're curious and you're going into places where no man or woman or whatever being has truly gone before that often, right? It seems like doing brain surgery is like being a space explorer. Is that correct?
For sure, for sure. Every operation is an exploration, an adventure, an uncovering, a discovery, a revelation. And you have to be comfortable living in a world of some uncertainty. You have to be comfortable making important decisions with somewhat inadequate information all the time. And that's what I loved about neurosurgery is that every operation is different, particularly if you're doing tumor surgery or aneurysm surgery, because every tumor is in a different location. Every tumor has a different size. Every tumor has a different consistency. Every tumor is wrapped around different blood vessels and nerves in a slightly different way and occurs in a different human being that has their own set of priorities that you have to balance in deciding what the right thing to do is for that individual. That's why it never gets boring, because you're coming into the OR every time doing something brand new. Even if you're using a technique that's old, the experience you're going to have is brand new. And then sometimes you're trying new techniques, which, even makes it more daunting and challenging because that's how surgery progresses. Gwen, you mentioned a tool go on to the book Imperfect Science, and surgery is an imperfect science. What we're doing now is going to be totally different than what we're doing in 5 years. 70% of the operations I do now are different than the ones I was trained to do 20 years ago. I do them completely differently because it changes over time. The techniques change, the tools change, the goals of surgery change, and you have to be very facile and flexible in your thinking.
Can I play lawyer here for just 1 second? Just really, really quick. You said every single surgery is different. You explained that very, very well. But you also said, and if you don't feel comfortable answering this, no worries. Just so you know, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not a medical malpractice lawyer. My wife is a surgeon, a general surgeon. So there's no way I could do that type of work. She would not be with me. But I just want to ask you a really quick question, if you don't mind.
Yep.
If in a brain surgery, you realize on the spot that you have to try a brand new technique, kind of like as you were mentioning in your prologue, because you went in there, you're like, nope, that's not going to work. I'm going to have to try something new. How do you get informed advanced consent from your patients about using something new? And how do you prepare patients for the fact that, hey, I might have to try something new inside your head?
It's a great question. I would say there's a difference between a newer technique that you're using that you tell the patient in advance, this is the technique we're using. Many people would do it differently. And I can talk about specifically, and I go to this in the book, when I started doing surgery through the nose to take out tumors that other neurosurgeons would take out through the top of the head, making an incision in the skin and removing a piece of skull and taking down the muscle. It's a very invasive thing. And I would say, I don't need to make any incisions. I'm going to go up through your nose and take this tumor out. The patients would say, well, how come the other surgeon didn't offer me that approach? And the answer is usually, well, they don't know how to do it. They haven't trained in doing it. I've spent the time to develop this and practice in cadavers and try it. And I know that it works. And I'm not the only one. There's other people who are doing it, but you're going to have to decide on your own who you want to see to take out the tumor. So the patient has the right to say, you know what, I don't want to go and have you do this up my nose. I want to do it the old fashioned way. But once they make the decision to do it, they've decided to go with you. And you've talked about that in advance. That is different than when you're in surgery. You have to make 1,000 decisions, Rudy. There's 1,000, hundreds of thousands of decisions that you make that you cannot anticipate in advance when you take out that tumor. Am I going to take out the last bit of tumor? Can I dissect this blood vessel off? If I tear a hole in the blood vessel, how am I going to fix that tear? What technique am I going to use to get out of trouble when I'm in trouble? And I've talked to a lot of neurosurgeons because now that I've written this book, I've had a lot of conversations with neurosurgeons on similar topics and stuff we don't talk about, but they will admit to me how often they have to innovate during surgery to figure out how to get out of problems or how to get the tumor out or how to fix the tear in the blood vessel because the clip is just, and the anatomy doesn't lend itself to the standard technique that we learned. So they had to put a piece of cotton in the clip in order that it would stop the bleeding. No one taught them to do that. They thought of it on their own, but somebody else may have thought of it in another operating room. And to a large extent, we use the tools available to us to get the job done. Whatever the job is that you have to get done, get the tumor out safely, clip the aneurysm, remove the lumbar disc, whatever it is that you're doing. Sometimes you have to fly a little bit by the seat of your pants. I love going into the operating room next door where the urologist is operating or the orthopedic surgeon or the OBGYN, and I'll look at the tools that they're using and I'll be like, oh my God, I never knew that tool existed. Like, how come we don't have that tool in neurosurgery? We're so siloed. And sometimes I'll say, you know what, I want the ophthalmology tray next time I do my operation because they have all these tools that I never even knew about that I could use for what I do. We're trained in surgery at one program by a group of surgeons. We think that that's the only way to do it, but it's not, because if you were trained at another program by different surgeons, you'd learn how to do it in a slightly different way, because every surgeon, as they're operating, will evolve how they do things, because they'll run into a problem and they'll have to innovate and figure out how to do it. And the next time they don't want to hit that problem again. So now they've changed the way they do things and they've evolved from the way they originally learned how to do it. And so surgery is imperfect, but every surgeon is almost like their own little invention factory of developing new tricks and nuances in order to do the surgery as well as they possibly can, because they were only exposed to a certain number of techniques and tricks when they trained. And then they also have to learn new stuff as new innovations come along to stay up to date. One of the things I talk about in the book, and it's important people understand, is that you sort of imagine when you go to see a surgeon, like you're taking a pill. If you take a Tylenol dose, no matter which CVS you buy your Tylenol, you're getting the same dose of Tylenol every time. Or if you go see a doctor for a certain treatment for diabetes and they give you a drug, another doctor would give you probably the same drug and roughly the same dose. But when you go see a surgeon who's operating on you, they're making thousands of decisions during your operation. You're getting a different treatment every surgeon you go to. It's going to be slightly different. They're going to make slightly different decisions. And the other sort of scary truth is, just like as professional athletes, if you compare the top 10% of tennis players, in fact, someone told me, I was listening last night, I don't remember if it was a podcast or something, they said the number 200 tennis player in the world has more in common with the number 4 tennis player in the world than the number 4 has with the number 3. Like they're just completely at a different level. And surgeons are the same way. We think we're getting the same treatment because everyone has the imprimatur of a neurosurgeon and they've trained in neurosurgery and they've gone to med school and they've done a 7-year residency. But the technical abilities and the judgment of neurosurgeons varies dramatically surgeon to surgeon. And the general public doesn't really know that. And they don't know that they need to get second and third opinions, and they need to make sure, they need to second guess a little bit if they get a recommendation and make sure it's the right thing to do and try to get another opinion from someone else, 2 or 3 people, to make sure that everyone agrees and that they're seeing the best person to do what they need done. Now, some neurosurgical operations are less technically difficult and your outcomes will be roughly the same with everybody. The more technically difficult the surgery becomes, the more the variation is going to be in the outcomes, depending on who you go to see. Because it's a skill like professional tennis or golfers, and the top 10% of golfers and the bottom 10% of professional golfers are dramatically different. They're all professionals. It's what they do for a living. They played golf their whole lives, but you put the number 1 against the number 200 and it's not going to be much of a match.
I'm interested in the way in which science and culture inform each other. You have a couple of examples here, like with epilepsy. Culture deemed it that somebody is possessed. There was recently, Malcolm Gladwell did a book on David and Goliath, and he recast the whole myth of David and Goliath by explaining that Goliath had most likely a tumor that caused a type of giantism, was actually quite vulnerable, experienced double vision. And then when we learn that about the brain, it makes it as though David was always the star. He was going to hit Goliath. Goliath was vulnerable. I was also thinking of another book, All in Her Head, by the oncologist, and she talks about the history of medicine and women. Okay, with that being said, when it comes to understanding the brain, if culture is saying, women's brains are different, or what is some sort of a cultural stereotype that then directed science, or what is some revelation about the brain that then changed us culturally? How do you see the tension between culture and understanding the brain?
One quick comment, the David and Goliath interpretation that Goliath had a pituitary tumor pushing on his optic nerves and he had acromegaly, which led to his gigantism. Although it was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, it really wasn't his theory. There were 2 physicians in Vanderbilt Hospital who actually came up with that theory. Mm-hmm. And like Malcolm Gladwell does, he takes other people's ideas and just brings them together and packages them beautifully. I think that, and I write about this near the end of my book, the most interesting questions to me, and ones that you talk about in this podcast, have to do with the self and free will, consciousness and agency. The question is, we have a lot of cultural stereotypes about what we believe to be true that are based on our common sense. And then we have evidence from neurosurgical operations or experiments that are done during surgery that give us completely different perspective on those same questions based on real evidence from science and the brain. So, I see it more differently. I think that we are culturally impacted in our view of the world based on the language that we speak, which creates certain categories of our experience. But science really doesn't care about the language that we speak. What ultimately happens is science informs our cultural view of the world and alters the way we talk about the world and the way we think about the world. And it happens very slowly over time. Sometimes culture directs how we ask those questions, which is what you were getting at. But ultimately, I think the answers lie in science, and science will give us the answers. And what's harder is to change culture, even though the science because we see the world through our language and our culture, and it's very hard to live outside of that perspective.
Yeah, like I was even thinking about the question of evil, which is a big philosophical topic. And then I read that, well, if you look at the brains of people who are deemed evil, that their it looks different. Then I was wondering, well, no, or, okay, so, all right. So this again might be a hopelessly naive question. The same way that somebody can look at skeletal remains and be able to come to a conclusion of age, male, female, things like that, is that possible with a brain? Is it possible to look at a brain? What could you know about the biography? Could you know the sex, the age? Is that possible? Or is this person a serial killer? Can you look at a brain and be
Yeah,
like, oh shit?
it depends on what technique you're using to look at the brain, right? If you're just using an MRI scan and looking at the anatomy of the brain, they look remarkably similar and don't tell you anything about behavior or personality. If you look at a PET scan, which is a metabolism scan or a blood flow scan, you really can't tell the difference. If you have people do certain tasks, think about certain things, and look at how the brain responds, its physiology responds, then there can be differences that emerge between people when they're actively participating in tasks. If you were able to get down to the level of chemicals in the brain and say, do women have the same concentration of dopamine in the hypothalamus as men do, then it may be different. You literally would have to put a probe in the brain and, suck out the dopamine chemical and measure it and compare it between individuals, which is not really an image of the brain or a picture of the brain. You'd have to measure it in very, very precise ways. We don't have such a clear link between brain anatomy, physiology, and behavior, although we know that all behavior comes from the brain, and you can dramatically alter someone's behavior and personality and likes and desires and feelings based on changing their brain. By stimulating their brain, by putting chemicals in the brain, we can dramatically alter who we are and how we think and our personalities in a very eerie, crazy way. For example, there's a great case that I write about in my book. Someone who had an electrode put in their brain for maybe it was an obsessive compulsive disorder or depression. They turn on the electrode and suddenly that person started to enjoy the music of Johnny Cash. And then when they flipped the electrode off, they no longer enjoyed the music of Johnny Cash. And the fact that you can change someone's appreciation for an artist merely by putting an electrode in the brain and turning it on and off is sort of a scary thought, because we like to think that who we are is some unchangeable inherent part of ourselves, but it's all just in our brain. And the minute you alter the brain, you can gain or lose desires and functions, and who you recognize and who you love and the foods you like to eat can be changed at the flip of a switch.
And the plasticity of the brain, that's something that's relatively new in our understanding, in that you can strengthen neural connections, like you can pick up a second language. There's the brain that you have when you're a kid. It's not static. There was a book that I thought was really interesting called The Case Against Perfection, and it was an argument against genetic enhancements that have nothing to do with health. I've been thinking about how much stock we put into this idea of genetics and DNA, and then contrasting that with this discussion about the brain. Who's in charge? Brain, or how does that interact with the DNA that you have? I guess that's what I'm wondering. It's just, it seems to be such an emphasis on genetics. But who am I? Am I my DNA or am I my brain?
You 100% are your brain, right?
Okay.
But I think the other question is, your brain organization is determined by your DNA. And the answer is, to one degree, a lot of your brain and who you are is determined by your DNA, but your environment has an enormous impact as well. We know that. So every experience that you have that's unique to you changes the synaptic structure, the connections in your brain over time. And those modify what your DNA has given you. Your DNA has given you certain propensities for your brain connections, like a schematic map that's your starting point. But from there, your experiences will alter it in a very unique way and unique to you. And it's the intersection between where you started, which is the DNA that's been given to you, and what the abilities are that are given to you by your DNA, and then the environmental influences that modify those to some extent. It's like Mendel's peas. Like there's certain genetics as to which are going to be the tall peas and which are going to be the short ones. But then based on the environment, the short ones can grow taller. Tall ones can grow shorter if you deprive them of light and food and things like that. So it's a combination of nature and nurture for sure. But the important thing that I would emphasize that people don't realize is that, we're not in as much control as we think we are as to who we're going to be and what decisions we're going to make. And a lot of that is determined by the brain itself doing its own calculating that it does underneath the level of consciousness that motivates us to behave in particular ways that we cannot really control with our conscious minds.
Yeah, see, that's what I was thinking. I guess I was very influenced by this idea of the case against perfection because it seemed as though all of this mental and financial investment is a fruitless endeavor because of the environmental factors that, the way in which a person would be. So we're investing this into us being just like a recipe, like on Pinterest. If you just put all these ingredients together, then boom, your baby is going to be this type of a person. But from what you're saying, I could, for instance, I was born in 77 in Southern California. I could be born in 77, let's say, in India with the exact same DNA. But because of the influences of being in a radically different culture, my brain would be different. And so the DNA can't actually be that much of a determining factor in the type of person I would be because my brain would be interacting with different foods, sounds, culture, weather systems.
That's right. But the DNA wouldn't be irrelevant because it would definitely impact where you can and cannot go and your propensities to some degree. But it's not the whole story. Rudy will appreciate the reference to the movie Gattaca, which is another science fiction movie with Ethan Hawke, where he's sort of genetically inferior, but he has this grit and desire that allows him to achieve things that you wouldn't imagine the DNA would allow you to do. And it just shows you that the nurture part, now I would argue that his grit was determined by his DNA also. The DNA examination that he went through overlooked the fact that, yes, he may be short, his IQ may be lower, but they didn't realize that his DNA gave him an enormous amount of grit and determination to overcome the weaknesses that the other parts of his DNA exposed him to, and that it really was all determined that he would become who he was going to be. They just weren't doing a thorough enough analysis of his brain and its propensities and abilities.
Great reference to Gattaca. Big fan of that film. Really wonderful philosophical film. Seems to me that the word grit and working hard and how you can overcome things and be dedicated seems to be a theme here. Can grit be taught? Number one. Number two, with the advent of AI, and Dr. Ted, you said that, hey, I knew that I didn't have the mathematical skills to be one of the all-time greats because that's wonderful that that's the standard you want to hold yourself to. But let's be honest, with the advent of AI, and I'm somebody who, by the way, hates math. I'm against it. Philosophically, just think it's dumb because you can't argue against it. And I was right because AI, in my opinion, eliminates the need to even know mathematics, even though I'm still trying to help my kids doing their second and third grade homework. My point is the following. I do still want to talk about grit. Here's my point. Aren't you glad that you went into brain surgery? Because in my opinion, we are hundreds of years away from having AI replace a brain surgeon as opposed to a mathematician. Yeah, I'd love an answer to that question. And number two, when you're talking about IQ and you're talking about deficiency and all that stuff, isn't AI the new crutch that can help with that? I totally agree with you. Grit and how hard you're willing to work and how much you're willing to suffer determines success. Aren't you glad that you went into brain surgery instead of becoming a mathematician because of the advent of AI? What say you?
I agree with your premise. The way I look at it, if you look at what large language models can do, OpenAI, Gemini, Claude, and the advances, what they're incredibly good at doing is taking enormous amounts of information that are very difficult for the human brain to digest and manipulate and sift through it and figure out ways forward and new sort of connections that puts them at an advantage. The human brain is a completely different type of computer than a computer is. It's designed completely differently. Our brain evolved on a planet with a body attached to it that had to solve an enormous amount of physical problems, right? We had to figure out how to get food, how to chase predators, how to build a shelter, how to reproduce. Those are physical problems that our brain was designed to solve. And we're incredibly good at solving physical problems. And a computer evolved not on a planet, but on somebody's desk in a box where they were given all the energy that they needed. And they never had to compete with other computers to survive. They never had to figure out how to get shelter. And so if you're playing a game of chess that has very defined rules, that has only a certain number, even though it's a very large number of solutions, the computer will be able to go through all those and teach itself how to do it better than a human brain. And that's one set of problems. But if you're manipulating the world around you, and if you look at the state of robotics, and yeah, I mean, the robots can jump around and they can kick, whatever, but you see, like, as soon as someone walks up to the robot and pushes it, it just kind of splatters onto the floor because suddenly it's dealing with an unusual situation. And if you look at robots trying to play a game of soccer, and where you're making thousands of decisions based on the physical world and interacting with the physical world, they're really bad at it. And so I don't think that a robot will have the ability to do brain surgery and make all of those decisions, because it's a skill set that involves interacting with the physical world in a very particular way and getting feedback that our brains are incredibly good at. Is it possible that in 100 years, that a robot could evolve to do that? Maybe, but not in the near future. And there's also certain decisions that we make when I'm operating on a patient. The most important question I can ask myself is, let's say it's a child. What would I want done if that were my child on the table? What would I want done to me if I were lying on the table? Do I need to take that last bit of tumor out and risk damaging a blood vessel that could cause a stroke or not? And that kind of a decision that has to do with understanding the human condition is going to be very difficult for a robot to do, who's never loved and lost and grieved and had a child and seen them play in the park and thought about them getting married someday and what is their future hold. All the human experiences that come down to making that decision correctly is going to be very difficult for a robot to do, not to mention the physical skill of it. So I agree with your conclusion 1,000%. And there's a lot of people in robotics who would disagree with that. And Elon Musk obviously disagrees with that. And he's made a lot of claims about his Optimus robot replacing all surgeons and can be a better surgeon in 3 years. No one will need to go to medical school. I think he's completely wrong about that.
That's so interesting. The emotional investment is part of being the good neurosurgeon.
For sure.
For a lot of times, we treated the emotions as though they were some sort of a distraction or they clouded reason instead of a way of informing reason.
What decision you're making, right? It
yes.
depends what kind of decision you have to make.
The plasticity of the brain, what's one of the most extraordinary things that would be an example of it that just really impressed people? I was thinking about somebody who was blind, who had climbed all major mountains, all 7 summits, with a device that looks like a lollipop that sits on his tongue. The taste buds are able to allow him to see that because the eyeballs don't work anymore, the brain rewired itself in a way for him to be able to navigate the world. To me, I can't wrap my head around that. It just seems amazing. What is a testament to how the brain rewires itself?
The brain is incredibly plastic, and we only perceive through the senses that we have, the 5 senses of the external world, and we have interoception of what's going on inside. But, we can only see certain wavelengths, but there are many more wavelengths out there. We can only hear certain things, but there are things above and below the threshold of what we can hear that other animals, they perceive the world differently than we do because they have different senses. There are fish who can sense motion of water, and they can tell if they're being chased without having to see that they're being chased. They can sense how the water is being displaced. Or animals who can sense magnetic fields, birds who navigate through magnetic fields. But there are human beings who are blind who have developed the ability to use echolocation. So they make clicking sounds, just like a porpoise or a bat.
Wow.
And they hear the way the clicking sounds that they make bounce off the objects around them, and they can navigate the external world using echolocation. Now, we have no concept of what it's like to see the world the way that blind person sees the world using echolocation, but it gives them some sense of the world around them. It's called their Umwelt. I think it's a German word. The world that they perceive based on the senses that they have. And there are some birds that see, we have 3 cones in our eyes, so we can only see a certain number of colors. If we had a 4th cone in our eye, we could see, instead of 1 million colors, we could see 50 million colors. And we would see the world the way the birds see the world when they pollinate different flowers, because they're perceiving things completely differently. Or see ultraviolet. You think about the Predator movie, Rudy, this is for you, who see in the ultraviolet range. We could imagine, and this is where I love the world of brain-computer interfaces, because the brain is so plastic that you could imagine a scenario where at a young age, you take some sort of a sensor that can sense things that we cannot sense in the world. So the ultraviolet and infrared or 700,000 hertz that we can't hear, and take that information and implant a computer chip in the brain that basically brings that information into the brain. the brain at a young age will learn how to incorporate that information. And you could imagine someone having those additional senses of the world around us and seeing the world and perceiving the world in a different way than we do because we're limited by the senses that we have.
Can I ask a question? I actually don't even want to ask this question. I can't believe I'm asking this question because I'm so worried about this answer. Damn it. I really don't want to ask this, but I'm going to ask it.
We don't have free will.
No, yeah, I already looked in the book. I'm not talking about free will. That could take us for forever. Do you think there'll be, and maybe not a perfect cure, but things that'll make the suffering for those that have it or for family members, let's just say in our relatively soon lifetime, next 10, 20, maybe 30 years, will there be some kind of quote unquote cure for dementia?
Obviously, it's very hard to predict the future. One of the issues with dementia, particularly Alzheimer's disease, is that it affects the whole brain. There are these plaques that get laid down everywhere that impact neuronal processing. And there's also, as we get older, the brain cells themselves die and atrophy. Like we lose brain cells all the time as we age. So you need a treatment that affects the whole brain all at once. And there are some interesting things out there. For example, there's a treatment called focused ultrasound that neurosurgeons use where they can take high frequency ultrasound waves, they pass right through the skull, and they can open up the blood-brain barrier, which is this wall that sort of prevents everything's in the bloodstream that you don't want getting into the brain from going into the brain, toxins and things like that. But by opening up the blood-brain barrier, it also allows things to get cleared out of the brain. And it is possible that we may develop a treatment, and some people are working on this, where opening up the blood-brain barrier may help the bloodstream clear those plaques out of the brain to help treat dementia. Or you could imagine allowing drugs that promote neuronal growth so we don't lose so many neurons as we get older, that there are some drugs that we could take that would send chemical signals into the brain so that those neurons don't die in the way they do, or enhance neurogenesis so that we're making neurons as we get older. So yeah, I think it's definitely possible that we can slow down the rate of dementia through a variety of different mechanisms. And there are people working on it, making progress, but slow. But so yes, I do.
Okay, great. So I will not transfer myself to a computer tomorrow. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait things out. If you ever listen to any shows, Doctor, you talk a lot. You talk a fair amount about OCD and other types of things in your book. You have a patient on here who is somebody who's fearful of all of the great science fiction films and TV shows and film noir that I just don't have time to watch right now, and so I want to live forever to watch and read everything. So that's my goal. Is because I'm a nerd. It's because I'm a nerd that I want to live forever, but really I'm a neurotic mess. I just wanted to put that out there for you, just in case you didn't know that.
For motivates.
Can I wrap up with, I know we're at the time. Ted, I think I could talk to you forever. I noticed it at the end, there was this discussion about dualism and this idea that the mind and the body are separate, that neuroscience has put us in the direction that it's actually one entity. I was thinking about in terms of film, whenever we have this idea of body switch or something like that, in our idea, culturally, you take the brain and put it into a different body. As the audience, we are always aware of who is who, right? Because we associate the self with the brain. So even if the brain goes into a completely different body, we're still on track with who is who. So I'm wondering if you can say anything to that as far as what does it mean to say that the mind and the brain are actually the same thing, that all mental states are physical. So when somebody says, I'm in love, they are not describing something that doesn't exist in space, but that is part of a brain change. And then what relationship does that have to the body? Like, could they theoretically be separated and you still be you in a different body? Or is the body a necessary expression that works with the brain? There's no way you would be the same self.
I think that and there's more and more people, there's a book called The Extended Mind that a lot of people have read by Annie Murphy Paul that talks about how important the body is. And I don't totally agree with everything she said, but there's a lot of truth to the fact that our brains evolved inside our body and attached to our bodies, and that what our brain became, it became because of our bodies. You can't just transfer that to a computer without a body, because the body is so essential to the inputs and the outputs of the brain that it's almost impossible to think of a brain in isolation without a body. And so I don't think that you could just put your brain in another body and it would be the same, because I think it would be way too confusing for that brain, because the signals coming in and going out would be so dramatically different that it would sort of freeze up and it wouldn't work. Not to mention that, I mean, it's not technically feasible. We don't have the ability to do that. We
It
connect
shows
neurons
that
like
our
that.
imagination associates the self with the mind as opposed to just this whole cohesive organism that works together. Yeah?
Yeah,
And all mental states are physical.
they are. Every thought you think is a state that your brain is in. Every decision you make is made because the brain has processed the information around you and decided what is the highest probability thing that you should do. And you do that thing. And then you come up with a reason afterwards why it felt like you decided to do it of your own free will.
I've been wondering if this
Go
parallel
ahead.
works that, let's say, the activity of running is contingent on the strength of like lungs, thigh muscles, endurance. The activity of running is an expression of these. So if those things are faltering, it shows up in the running. If they're stronger, then the running is better. Is thinking similar, that the strength of thinking, the activity of thinking is contingent on the strength of the physical brain? And that it can
Absolutely.
wane in the same way that running, like if you stop running for a year, true story, it will be more difficult to get started again. So in the same way, like if I'm using ChatGPT to do the thinking for me, or if I stop practicing my second language, the expression of that problem is expressed in the physical reality of the brain. Is that a fair parallel?
100% it's fair. I don't think you're giving ChatGPT enough credit. I don't think it's doing the thinking for us. In fact, I think it allows us to think more broadly, expansively, and quickly about a variety of subjects. So
Mm.
if you're curious about something, it might take you hours to find the answer to it that will lead you to the next question and the next thought. But with ChatGPT, you can very quickly have a detailed summary that you can read and enhance your brain, because you're taking in all this information that's answering your question that very quickly leads you to the next question and the next question that can be answered with the help of ChatGPT to expand our minds more quickly.
I'll take issue with just a couple of things there. Number one, you're saying that you, me, Gwen, we're all kind of around the same vintage of, we're not millennials, we're not Gen Z, we're not Generation A. We can say that, oh yeah, well, this will help us. This will make us go faster because it's going to lead us to this question or that question a lot faster. But before AI, before ChatGPT, before Gemini, my favorite, we were making all of those connections. We were doing that research. We were getting our brains into the process of making those connections. And I do wonder about my children, Gwen's children, everyone else's children, if they're always going to have ChatGPT and AI, what are they missing, if anything? Maybe your point is, hey, don't give your brain so much credit. Like, it's not that big of a deal. You should have been doing that a lot faster. But those steps, those things that we did in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and the 2000s, et cetera, have helped to develop our brains. Statement number two is, we did an episode, Doctor, on cognitive behavioral therapy, where we talked about the mind and the body and all that other type of stuff. And we basically said, hey, sometimes our minds, which put that random terrible thought or that random terrible thing there, and you're like, how did that get into my mind? Sometimes there's a reason to separate the mind from the brain. It's because sometimes you just want to call your mind an asshole, because your mind will say something bad about you or bad about somebody, and you'll be like, where did that come from? Just kind of putting those two statements out there. Would love to hear your reactions.
Yeah, the first thing you were talking about is, I think, losing our ability for critical thinking, right? That somehow we're giving up critical thinking to the AI or research to the AI. What I see coming is that the human brain will evolve to work with AI, because now we have all this massive amount of information that the AI will provide us with, but we still have to figure out what's important, what's not important, what are we going to use it for, how are we going to implement it? Like, there's still an enormous amount of critical thinking that needs to exist just in order to interact with an AI, but we have access to an enormous amount of data in a way that we didn't in the past. So I think it will be a net positive, and we will evolve in a positive way to use the things that our brain does really well and to turn over the things that we don't do well to the AI and allow them to work with us. The
If
second
we
thing,
have critical thinking skills, I'd love to just tie that together,
but
because
I
I
think we'll have to
swear.
have them. I think that'll be part and parcel of working with an AI, is to
Excellent.
sort of figure out how to work with them.
Gwen, this is why we do our show. And Dr. Ted, no joke, in the last 2 years, we have been doubling down on the importance of critical thinking skills for the very reason that you just said, is because of we're not going to be able to stop AI. Like, it ain't going to happen. So you better learn the skills that determine what's important. So thank you for saying that without me even
Sure. The other
giving
thing
you a
that
soft.
but the thing I take issue with is you sort of said you separated yourself from your mind. The way you referred to it as if they were two different things. Why did my mind do that to myself? Something like that. And I think that's a problem that's based in our language. Like we have a word for mind and we have a word for brain. And we have a lot of expressions use that distinction of like, why did I do that? Why did my brain tell me to do this thing? That creates the illusion that they're two separate things. I would argue that they're not two separate things. They're the same thing. And that when you say, why did I do that? What you're really saying is a part of my brain that processed the information around me and made a decision to behave in a certain way. Your brain motivated you to do that.
Just really, really quick, because this is vitally important. I did not say I made an action. I did not say I made a decision. I said my mind put a thought into my brain. I didn't act on it because Jesus Christ, my mind's an asshole. I would never do that. I would never say that. The decision is against what my mind is saying or something.
Okay.
So I had to correct you.
I'm glad you
my
did.
point was sometimes our minds are assholes.
The way I would rephrase it, I would say sometimes our brains are assholes. So it's not the mind that put that idea into your head. So your brain is made up of multiple modules. It's not just one homogeneous thing. There's multiple processing modules that are processing information. And one module in your brain could suggest that you behave in one way. And another module in your brain that is processing information with different priorities suggests you behave in a different way. And those are sort of ideas coming into your head as to what am I going to do? And I think there's sort of a Darwinian process where the brain, its different modules are making different suggestions to you. And there's somehow some filtering mechanism that allows a choice to be made, although I don't think it's a choice that we have control over as to what we're going to do. But you're aware of these unconscious ideas that emerge into consciousness, some of which you think are horrible. But there's a part of your brain, maybe this sort of animalistic part that is the one that is still there from when you were, evading predators thousands and millions of years ago, that wants you to shoot an arrow into the person next to you because you're competing with them or whatever the horrible thing is that you want to do. It's all coming from the brain. It's not coming from anything else, but your brain is not one organ. It's multiple organs. And we know we can divide the brain in half. You have two brains in your head. There's one on the left and one on the right. And you can divide it in half so that the one on the left and the one on the right are not communicating with each other. And you can put ideas into one hemisphere of your brain that can make the side of your body that brain controls behave in a certain way and put a different idea in the other brain. And the other side of your body will start behaving in a different way because you now hold two different ideas and they're not communicating with each other. But the individual who has their brain cut in half and is behaving in two different ways because they have two brains, they don't feel like they're two selves. They still feel like they're one person. And the question is, how is that possible? Some would argue, and there's a neurosurgeon with a more religious bent, that because we can divide the brain in half and we still feel like a single self, that the self must lie outside the brain. It must lie somewhere else in this ethereal realm that we haven't figured out how to describe. And the soul is there. But I would argue differently, which is to say that the self does not exist in the way we think it does. We don't just have two brains, but we have hundreds of brains that are processing information. And there's multiple cells, if you will, within us that are making different decisions in time. But we, after the fact, create the illusion of a single self because we end up behaving in one way. Our brains are wired and programmed in such a way to make it seem as if our behaviors are controlled by our free will and our agency and a single self, even though that does not exist. It's an illusion.
And I get, Gwen, this is a danger. This is why we need to have him back on. He's going down the no free will road, and that could take us hours to talk about.
Yeah.
That's what he's going down here. He's going down this road. I'm catching you on that, aren't I, Dr. Ted?
You caught me guilty as charged.
It's just so interesting. There was the example of people who say that they communicate with the dead or they hear the voice of God. And I don't recall what the word for it was, but there is actually a part of the brain that explains why some people are experiencing that. If somebody, let's say, has a religious disposition and they are saying they're communicating with God, and you as the brain surgeon are saying, actually, that's a part of the brain here, I can snip it and then that'll go away. What if somebody doesn't want it? Like, does it matter? What if that is part of somebody's joy? Like, I'm just wondering what all of that means, that you can find the spot in the brain that some people have that explains why they say that they are hearing the voice of God or something like that.
Yeah.
What's the response? Like, that would be an example that I would think would have a cultural response to. The fact that you can point to the explanation and that explanation is not that the person is actually communicating with God.
Yeah. Dostoevsky had epilepsy, and he wrote about his seizures. And every time he had a seizure, he had a religious experience where he undeniably knew that God existed and felt the presence of God as part of his seizure. And we know what seizures are. They're neurons in the brain that are firing in an uncontrolled way, and they can be associated with feelings and emotions, and you can relive events and you can see things and experience things when you have seizures because it's your brain basically running amok. A seizure occurs because there are parts of the brain that neurons start firing in an uncontrolled way, and they can elicit experiences and feelings and smells. Any experience that the brain can have can arise as the result of a seizure. Dostoevsky, it was a religious experience and the certainty of God's existence, but it was arising from abnormal firings of neurons in his brain. And in theory, if they removed the part of his brain that was causing his epilepsy, all those visions would be gone. So it does raise the possibility that some religious instincts and feelings and experiences may be pathologic states of the brain, or at least explainable by brain states. They don't have to be called pathologic.
Okay. The brain is also a protective mechanism, right? Like if you experience severe trauma and you don't have any memory of it, would that be the brain protecting you? That it's not only our survival, but it's also, it functions in that way to protect us.
For sure. People talk about how the pain of childbirth, and that, a lot of mothers who have a horribly painful childbirth, they want to, they sort of forget how painful it was, which is why they want to have the next child and the next child. And that may be an evolutionarily designed mechanism so that you don't remember how painful it was, because evolution wants you to have as many babies as you can, because that's how our species survives. You think about traumatic experiences and leading to multiple personalities, that sort of the brain is fractured, and it's a way of compartmentalizing and dealing with some traumatic experience in the past.
When people are about to die and they say they saw a light or their life flash before their eyes and like they survive whatever it is, can that also be explained by something in... Yes.
Yeah, it really can, because when you're in a near-death experience, your brain doesn't have enough oxygen in it. You may be in an ICU getting all kinds of different medications, and that's going to affect the way the neurons in the brain are firing. If they don't get enough oxygen, your vision could narrow and you could see a small tunnel because you have tunnel vision because of the blood flow to your retina. And you could say, oh my God, I saw a tunnel, or I had an experience of seeing a relative. But it could be that because of the hypoxia in your brain had a seizure and it just brought up the memory of that relative, or you were getting some drug at the time. Think of all the drugs we pump into people in the ICU, and all those drugs go into the brain and affect the brain state. And so they can start hallucinating, and you can explain those near-death experiences based on physical things going on with the brain as it's approaching death.
Dr. Ted, thank you so much. We've taken a lot of your time. You're just infinitely interesting. And I am very excited to be promoting your book and telling everyone about it because, like you said, it's a big book, but it reads almost like a novel. Like a thriller,
excellent.
Like a puzzle. I mean, I'm telling you, even just the first few pages, I was locked in. And yeah, it's up there with the greats, with the really great like medical histories and biographies. And yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for taking time from brain surgery to talk to a philosopher and a lawyer.
We thank you very much. And I've already told my wife about this book, and we have a lot of doctors that listen to our podcast. And I know that this isn't just for doctors, but it's a great book. So thank you for your time, sir.
Guys, I really appreciate it. It was so fun talking to both of you. You guys are great. You have a great rapport and chemistry, and it just makes it so much fun to engage. Thanks for having me.
Wait, last one. Who has the better brain, women or men?
Oh, Jesus. Why did you even please, as a lawyer, I'm telling you not to answer that question.
Exactly. I was going to say, Rudy, get me out of this.
No comment, Fifth Amendment, whatever people say.
Thank you.
Okay.
No, I gotta go. There's someone's calling.
Bye.
Sorry.
Food is in the Details is produced by Dr. Gwendolyn Dolske and Rudy Salo. Remember to check out those show notes so you can get Dr. Schwartz's book. You can join our Patreon. And if you are into podcasting or you want to gift something to a friend who's in podcasting, check out Interview with Intention. If you haven't yet, we'd really appreciate a rating, a review. This helps us highlight our guests, and continue this work in public philosophy. Okay, until next time, bye.